of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else. Jesus told this parable. Two men went up the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all that I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Most of the parables end with this sort of question mark of how to apply it. Here we start in verse 1, right up front. This is where it's going. I was thinking it's kind of like some movies, okay? 26 years ago and 2 days, I know exactly because I can judge when my son was born by it. 26 years ago and 2 days, my wife and I went to watch Titanic. And it began in the opening scene. They've got a submarine that's going around this sunken ship. You're like, oh goodness, what's going to happen? Or I think some of you got that. I don't know, maybe you don't know history. It's a little bit of a spoiler alert to you if you watch it. I don't know, maybe that's too soon. From the opening scene, you know what's going to happen, and we're just going to do is unfold the story that goes along with that. Jesus is going to now unfold a story about two different men. The first one, a Pharisee goes up to pray. And we're going to look at the Pharisee and his prayer. There's two men that go up to the temple to pray. That's the start. Two people who are religious. They're going to connect with God. One of them is a Pharisee. Let's pause there to make sure we're all on the same page. In the Old Testament, Nehemiah leads people of Israel out of captivity back down to Jerusalem. The first thing they do is they build a wall around the city. Then they rebuild the temple, and then they institute temple worship. And they're doing this. People don't know the law. And so Ezra's going to stand up on the podium in front of everybody. He's going to start with Genesis 1:1. He's going to work his way through it. But the people don't get it. They need help. So he gets a group of men who can help explain what he's saying to the common person. That's the beginning of the Pharisees. This year we're doing through both email and text, and we're doing Bible reading group. I have 4 different groups going at the same time. And last week we worked through the end of Exodus, we worked through Leviticus, we started Numbers, and we talked about it and said, how in the world did they keep all of the stuff in the Old Testament straight? Those laws are so many and so complex. We did it 2 different ways. The Levites They helped explain the law. One of them here has gone up to pray. Now, what was common practice in the day, if you're in the temple and gathered there with other Jews, he walks to the front of the crowd, he looks up towards heaven, and he lifts his hands and he begins to pray. Now let's use what Jesus said in verse 9 to outline his prayer. All right? He said, this parable is going to address first those who looked down on others. Different translations put it different ways. Some say that looked at others with contempt, with displeasure. The word can mean as much as rejected. Those who saw themselves as better than others, this is how he prays. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. He looks down and he begins to list different things he's thankful for. I'm thankful that I'm not, like a robber, a thief. That's the 8th commandment. I'm thankful that I don't break number 8 of the 10 commandments. That would be a lawbreaker. I'm thankful. His second word is evildoers. Just basically means anybody who's broken God's law. I'm thankful that I'm not someone who's broken one of the specific 10 commandments. I've not broken any of God's laws. Then he comes back again and says, I'm thankful I'm not an adulterer. That would have been the 7th commandment. I'm thankful that I didn't break that law. And then he turns and says, or this tax collector. Now, what's implied is very easy to see. Someone who breaks God's specific 10 commandments, someone who breaks God's general law, this guy aligns with them. He is definitely, if you looked at a tax collector of anything, he is a law breaker. And I am so thankful that I'm not like him. The Pharisee Jesus calls this being confident in your own righteousness. Verse 12, I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. The reason he's so confident in his righteousness is because of what he is doing. He mentions 2 things specifically. The first is fasting. The Old Testament law required that you would fast 1 day a year on the Day of Atonement. You were to set aside and fast in dedication to God. The Pharisees thought if 1 day is good per year, then what if we did 1 a week? And eventually it became 2 a week. So every Monday and every Thursday they fasted. They went without food for an entire day, all day Monday and all day Thursday. Now, it may not sound like much devotion, but how many of us have ever skipped a meal for religious reasons? Just 1 meal. most of us haven't. It's pretty devoted to skip twice a week, 52 weeks a year. The other thing he says is, and I tithe. Tithe is giving 10%. Now, the 10% could come multiple ways. If you kept livestock, you could give 10% of your livestock. If you were a farmer, you could give 10% of your grain. Or you could just sell everything and then give 10% of your income. Well, whatever it was, you were to give 10% to the temple treasury, which would maintain the temple, which would feed the priests, which would do the work of the Lord. Matthew 23:23 says that the Pharisees were so meticulous in this that mint, dill, and cumin they divided and gave a tenth. The illustration Jesus is giving, imagine the smallest things in the garden. They counted out even the smallest things so that they would be sure they never kept 1/10 of what belonged to God. That doesn't sound like much. You realize that the average American gives around 2.5%. All charities, right? 2.5%. And let's be honest, most of us do it off of if we're going to give 10% of our income. That doesn't include any kind of gifts, any kind of anything else, produce from our garden, those kinds of things. They give 10 of everything. We're confident in our own righteousness. Paul writes to the church. The Apostle Paul was also a Pharisee. He writes to the church in Philippi, says in chapter 3, as far as the Old Testament righteousness by the law, he says, I was faultless. I did meticulously. The Pharisee looks righteous. The problem is that we had another word to his righteousness. It was self-righteous. Back to the prayer one more time. As you read through that prayer, you're going to notice a few different things. One, he thanks God. He thanks God not for what he has received, but he thanks God for what he's not. His reality is, God, thank you that I've made good choices. You put me in a position where I'm always the one making good choices. Second thing, he doesn't ask God for anything. There's not a statement of request of God, I need you in my life. Third thing, the English version I read to you has this word 4 different times. The original Greek connected to the 5 times. It's one simple pronoun, I. It's self-righteousness. He is confident in what he is doing. And there's really, ultimately, in his life, no need for God to be present. I was trying to think of a great illustration of self-righteousness. And every time I did, it kind of came off like I was self-righteous. So I was kind of, this is a hard thing to illustrate. And then it dawned on me. In the book of Revelation, Jesus writes 7 letters to the churches of Asia Minor. And in Revelation chapter 3, the one to Laodicea, he says, you say, I am rich and in need of nothing. He said, what you don't see is that you're wretched, pitiful, poor, naked, and blind. In other words, you see yourself through this self-righteous lens. God says, I see you in a completely different light. That you think you have everything, but you're not depending on me. That's this Pharisee. But the parable continues. We move from the Pharisee and his prayer to the tax collector and his attitude. Let's go back again to verse 13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven. He beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. A tax collector. Now, you could start to make some assumptions about tax collectors. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page. Tax collectors would do is someone who would make a bid to the Roman Empire. They would say, I will pay you such amount of money to collect taxes for this region. And so it was the invading army oppressing the Jews. They served the Roman Empire, were considered traitors because of that. They were considered liars because they could make up any number they wanted to collect taxes or what percentage it was. They were considered thieves because they were taking from people who had worked hard and adding their own pockets. They were despised in the New Testament. A tax collector always listed one of these two groups: tax collectors and prostitutes, tax collectors and sinners. Who they're usually lumped together with. They were not viewed well. And this guy goes up and look at him when he prays. His prayer is a little different. Instead of going to the front, it says he stood at a distance. He's off to the side. Instead of looking up towards heaven, which was the practice of the time, he bows his head. Instead of arms outreached, as if to say, God, here I am, he beats his breast, which is a sign of contrition. His picture is the opposite, the exact opposite of the Pharisee. The Pharisee is self-righteousness, that I'm here, God, and the tax collector humbly bows before his king. That's the imagery of the Old Testament. You're bowing before a king. Now, I get this can kind of go by us because we're all familiar with this type of format. I was thinking about when I was in junior high and high school, we would go to conferences, and at the end of every sermon, it was always the same thing. The guy would say, all right, now, everyone in this room, every head bowed and every eye closed. I don't know if, did you ever hear anything like that? Everyone, and so we kind of think that's the way that prayer was. They're thinking the opposite. Prayer is every hands up, every head to the heavens. Bowing is an act of worship, a recognition of someone greater than you. He takes a different stance in what he does. And he offers up this humble little one-line prayer. Lord, have mercy on me. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He's actually starting a quote of a passage of Scripture. He's starting the first verse of Psalm 51. Now, I know you probably don't immediately recognize when I say Psalm 51, so let me give you the background. See, there's this great king in Israel named David. And David one night is up on his rooftop and he sees this woman, Bathsheba. And he invites her into his bed. And he commits adultery. She gets pregnant. To cover it up, he calls Uriah home, tries to get him drunk. That doesn't work. Eventually, he's going to send Uriah to the front lines and he will be killed. At that moment, David thinks he's got away with it. Till 1 Samuel 12, Nathan the prophet shows up. And he tells him a story, kind of a parable. He's telling a story about who has one little sheep, and the mean guy takes away his one little sheep, and David is enraged. And Nathan says, you're that man. You stole someone's wife. David's broken. Before God, he recognizes his sin, and he weeps, and he sits down, and the first thing he does is write Psalm 51. That's what this guy quotes. The opening line, Lord, have mercy on me. But then he changes it. Now, your English version only would have to do this for some reason. Say, have mercy on me, a sinner. It actually has the direct article there. Lord, have mercy on me, the sinner. What he's doing is saying, you know what? David was broken by the weight of his sin when he was confronted by it. That's no longer about David. That's about me. Lord, have mercy on me. I am a broken person by my sin. And I need your mercy and grace. I was thinking about a guy who came to me one day heaven, boasting, and one who bows down, crying for mercy. And then Jesus delivers the point. In case you didn't get it from the first line, let's come back to it one more time. Verse 14, I tell you that this man, that tax collector, rather than the other one, went home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. This man went home justified. Now, that word justified, there's different Greek words that are translating it. This one particular is a verb form of the word righteous. So here's another way you could translate it. This man went home as if he was the righteous one. This man's life was counted to him as righteousness. We use the word justified. Think of it this way. It's just as if I'd never sinned. So the guy who comes and who is broken, crying out for mercy, receives mercy. Now, again, let's lay things in their context so that we're 100% clear. This is also a parable about God and his kingdom. Many years ago, I heard a sermon called Whose White Hat? Whose White Hat? And he laid out this idea. If you ever watched an old Western, the old John Wayne Western, the guys in the white hats are the good guys, and the guys in the black hats are the bad guys. All right, just pretty simple. You could tell. Black and white movies, easy to tell who's good, who's bad. He said, imagine you're at the temple that day. Who's wearing the white hat? He said, well, at first glance, it seems like it's the Pharisee, that he should get the white hat because he's living such a righteous life. It's not his hat. It's too big for him. Maybe it should be like this tax collector. It's, yeah, the white hat in the story is God. We have a God who pours out mercy to people who feel broken. And it's easy to miss that. Don't just go out and go, I'm going to be like that tax collector. I just need to be broken. No, you need to worship that tax collector God. You need to, when you feel broken, have someplace that you can take your hurt and your shame and put it on yourself. So packing it up with you and carrying through the rest of your life, that you have a God that you can go before him with your head bowed and your eyes closed, and you can say, Lord, have mercy on me, and you receive mercy. Story unfolds for us the kind of attitude that God is looking for. And the last line brings it home. For those who are exalted, they're going to be humbled, and those who are humbled will be exalted. Now, nobody wants to run and say that's a heaven passage. But with God, if you live a humble life, that's what we're told in this parable. That at some point, as you live a humble life before God, even in your present brokenness, God lifts you up. Be clear, be clear. Not to go out of here today and say, thank you, God, I'm not like that Pharisee. How prideful was he? You're to go out of here with a humble attitude that is willing to take any broken situations in your life to God for mercy, knowing that he will respond with grace. Brian Hedges, in a sermon, tells a story about before he became a preacher. He said, I was working in a warehouse. I was in the back of the warehouse. And he said, I was trying to, the best of my ability, share my faith with other people. I was new. I was a kid. I wasn't very smart. I didn't know how to handle situations at that point in time. So I've come off a little bit rough. He said, but this one guy showed up one day and he said, we were talking to each other, and I started to try to share Jesus, and he stopped me. And he said, I heard about you. When I first got here, they were first training me. They said, just know when you get to the back, there's going to be a guy back there trying to share what he believes about Jesus. And I want you to know right up front, I'm an atheist. He said, I don't know what struck me in that moment, but I thought, I'm gonna see how this works. I'm gonna try to shock this guy a little bit. He said, so I blurted out, well, I want you to know what I believe. I believe in a God who sends good people to hell and bad people to heaven. He said, the guy stepped back and said, what? He said, yeah. I believe in a God who sends good people to hell and bad people to heaven.